Supergirl's love life is totally insane. Of course, we're going to talk about the horse, but there's also a merman, there's time travel, there's cancer. It's a trip. So I'm going to walk you through Kara Zor-El's various love interests. First up is Dick Malvern, originally named Dick Wilson. When Supergirl first arrived on Earth, Superman placed her in an orphanage under the alias Linda Lee. Dick Wilson was a fellow orphan. He made his debut appearance in Action Comics number 256 in the story The Great Supergirl Mirage. This is Supergirl's 5th story, so still pretty early on. Dick accidentally takes a picture of Supergirl, and at the time, Supergirl was meant to be a complete secret at the behest of Superman, who wanted to use Kara as a secret weapon of sorts. So the picture, along with some other evidence, leads Dick to believe, correctly, that Supergirl and Linda are one and the same. Linda then has to convince Dick she isn't Supergirl, but also explain the mere existence of Supergirl. She accomplishes this with a Supergirl robot sent to her by Superman just in time. Dick was meant to be an analog to Lana Lang, Superman's high school sweetheart from Smallville. Linda flat out points out the connection in her thought balloons. There was eventually romance between the two, especially once they were both adopted and in high school in Midvale as Linda Danvers and Dick Malvern. But the two ultimately drifted apart. Dick reappeared at the end of the Daring New Adventures of Supergirl series in 1984, Supergirl number 23. This was intended to be followed up in a new anthology book, but DC decided to kill Supergirl in Crisis on Infinite Earths and erase her and her stories from continuity. Dick's story concluded in the first issue of Solo in 2004. Solo was an anthology series meant to highlight various artists who were more or less free to do whatever they wanted. In the story Young Love, drawn by Tim Sale, Dick dies from cancer. Kara is able to say goodbye to him, and he reveals that he always knew that Linda was Supergirl. And Dick's death was recently referenced in the current Sophie Campbell Supergirl series, so he is very much dead. So next up is Jarrow. When Superman was in college, he fell in love with this mermaid, Lori Lemaris, like head over heels. They tragically couldn't be together, and she wound up marrying somebody else. In the story, Supergirl's first romance from Action Comics number 269, Lori calls Supergirl to save Atlantis from some threat. In Atlantis, Kara meets a merman named Jarrow. The two hit it off and ultimately kiss, Kara's first kiss. Kara thinks to herself about how much she likes Jarrow before remembering that all of the Atlantean mermaids and mermen are telepathic and thus can hear every single word she is thinking. So she runs away embarrassed. Action Comics number 284 features the story, The Strange Bodies of Supergirl. Red Kryptonite turns Supergirl into a mermaid, so she decides to visit Jarrow, who is crazy down bad for Super Mermaid. Like, he straight up just proposes to her practically on the spot, and Kara is not into it. The red kryptonite wears off, and she just kind of flies off like, I'll think about your proposal and give you an answer later. So yeah, that relationship went nowhere, and Jarrow more or less stops appearing after the 60s. Arguably, Supergirl's most popular and enduring ship is with Brainiac 5. They first met in Action Comics number 276 in Supergirl's 3 Supergirl Friends. Kara travels to the 30th century to become a member of the Legion of Superheroes, a team of teenage heroes from the future. One of their members is Brainiac 5, a descendant of the Superman villain Brainiac. Kara and Brainiac 5 are into each other, and Brainiac 5 actually asks her to stay and be his girl, but due to the reality of Kara living in the 20th century and Brainiac 5 in the 30th, or 21st and 31st, as it stands now, the two never really get together. They're into each other, they flirt, but it never goes anywhere meaningful. But it is something that writers love to call back to and reference and tease. When Supergirl was brought back into continuity in the 2000s, she went on many adventures with the Legion, even took over their book for a little bit. So it's always there even today, but DC has never fully committed in the comics. The two do end up together in the Justice League Unlimited animated series, though. Once you get past the Silver Age, Kara kind of stops having a consistent love interest. Part of that is she would get reinvented with a new status quo every time a new writer was brought on. In her first solo series in the early 70s, she dated a different guy in like every single issue. Nothing ever stuck, and that remained true even when they brought Supergirl back in 2004. But there is one love interest from her 2005 series that I feel is important to bring up, and that is Power Boy. Power Boy shows up in the final page of Supergirl number 11 in 2006, though the proper story with him takes place in Supergirl number 13 through 15. Power Boy saves Kara, and the two quickly start dating. But Power Boy is a possessive and jealous stalker who ends up hitting Kara. The Power Boy story is ultimately a story about spousal abuse. Once he goes mask off, Kara just kicks his ass, including a knee to the groin. I also have to mention Dick Grayson. In the 2000s post-crisis era, Kara is still a high schooler while Dick is a fully grown adult and Nightwing. And at the time, Kara had a major crush on Nightwing. But various events since then have reset Dick and Kara to be roughly the same age again. And in the current World's Finest series, it was established that the two have a dating history. In Batman Superman World's Finest number 12, the two go on a disastrous date. The book takes place in the past, so Dick is still Robin, and they're both teenagers. And Dick totally fumbles the ball, and it is hilarious to read. In issue number 44, the two do have a makeout session in the Batmobile that Dick also manages to screw up. It's all very cute. Okay, before we get to the main event, I think it's worth mentioning the TV show because I love it. Kara's initial love interest in the show was Jimmy Olsen, or James as the show prefers, and there is a tiny bit of comic history there, though nothing super notable or interesting. The first season of the show has this very tedious love square where Kara is into James, and James is into Kara, but he has a girlfriend, Lucy Lane. And also, Kara's best friend, Wynn, has a not-so-secret crush on Kara. This is all resolved by season 2 when Lucy disappears, never to be mentioned again, and the other three just decide to be friends and nothing more. Kara then meets Mon-El, a major Legion of Superheroes character, and they proceed to fall in love over the course of the season. A decent number of fans were very against this relationship, but the two actors, Melissa Benoist and Chris Wood, wound up getting married and have a child together, which is super cute, and they have a ton of chemistry. The relationship does not last in the show, as Mon-El elects to stay in the future with the Legion of Superheroes, and also married someone else in the future. Kara then dates this guy William in season 5. He's the most boring character to ever exist, and the relationship fizzles out. And I, of course, will mention that the show inspired the very popular ship of Supergirl with Lena Luthor called Supercore. Never canon, but I do know a lot of people really wanted to see that happen, so worth mentioning. All right, time for the main event. Let's talk about the damn horse. Comet the Super Horse debuted in Action Comics number 292 in 1962 in the story The Super Steed of Steel. The following issue featured the secret origin of Supergirl's horse. So, Comet was a centaur in ancient Greece and fell in love with the sorceress Circe. He went to Circe and asked her to make a potion that would turn him entirely human so that they could be together. Circe agreed, but a jealous rival, Maldor, messed with the potion so that when Comet drank it, he accidentally became all horse instead. Oops, all horse. Circe felt really bad about this mix-up, so she gave Comet superpowers and immortality. Maldor banished Comet to an asteroid with magic, where Comet was estranged for centuries. However, when Kara's rocket was on its way to Earth, the repeller rays on the rocket destroyed the asteroid and freed Comet. Comet then followed Kara to Earth and began telepathically communicating with her via dreams to lead her to him. Action Comics number 301 features the secret identity of Superhorse. Once again, a magic spell is put on Comet. This spell changes Comet into a man anytime a comet passes over Earth. So then there are these stories in which Comet becomes a man, Bronco Bill, and romantically pursues Kara, but never tells her that he's her horse. So as far as Kara is concerned, there's just this hot cowboy that shows up every once in a while and they make out. And Comet is just madly in love with Supergirl. It's insane. Comet died in the miniseries Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, sacrificing himself to save Kara. That's 2 Supergirl love interests that are dead. And Jero might as well be dead, so kinda 3. So there's a decent overview of Supergirl's love life. It's a lot of dudes being totally obsessed with her and her having to pump the brakes when they go overboard. Which one is your favorite? Which one should Supergirl end up with? Or who should she date instead? Let me know all your thoughts.